Good to go? All right. Gentlemen, ladies, thanks for attending. I'm going to give a brief overview of my experiences in my deployment back in 2004 through 2006. I was a platoon leader during that time with the Air Defense Battalion. That was at that time part of the Minnesota National Guard. During our time, during the deployment, the Air Defense Battalion was disbanded, so to speak. Colors retired, and when we returned home, we really didn't have a place to go. So, hence I'm a cavalry officer now in the 1st Brigade. It's funny how things work out. But at the time, I did fire a Stinger missile, had a bat at one time. So, in that past history. This is the agenda that I'll be going through, just kind of sequenced by time. Introduction, talked a little bit about the 1st Battalion, 216th Air Defense out of Minnesota. The headquarters was in Bloomington. Delta Battery, our sister unit, was in Monticello, and they provided direct support to the 81st Brigade out in Washington. And then my unit, Echo Battery, out of Cloquet, Minnesota, provided direct support to the 29th IBCT out of Hawaii. The 29th IBCT was made up of soldiers from all over, mostly out in the Pacific or on the West Coast, soldiers from Hawaii, Oregon, California, Minnesota, Arizona, and then the Pacific Islands, American Samoa, Guam, and the Mariana Islands. We had quite the character set of individuals, quite the diverse population of individuals in that brigade. The 29th Brigade's motto is Hiki No, which actually stands for can do. So you heard Hiki No all the time. You heard Hiki No more than you heard Hua, which was quite interesting. The timeline, we were alerted in June of 2004. We mobilized on August 20th. I can remember that day very well. We went to Fort Bliss, Texas, and spent our time there from August through December. We did a 3-week stint at JRTC in January of 2005, and then went straight to Kuwait from there, arriving in late January. We were in Iraq and Saudi Arabia in early of 2005, and we redeployed in January of 2006. The leadership at the time, Major Tad Hervis was our commander. First Sergeant Dan Steele, he was our first sergeant, and a little asterisk there. He did end up getting a medical refrad mid-tour. We had Jason Brecky, so our first classmate, Jason Brecky, came and was stand-in as our first sergeant during the last part of the deployment. Captain Justin Rogers was our XO, and then we had 3 platoon leaders, Greg Hungville, Shane McGurnich, and myself that were platoon. Our pre-deployment training, as stated before, August 2004 to January 2005, was in Fort Bliss, Texas, down in El Paso. We actually spent about 6 weeks on Fort Bliss proper, doing a lot of common task training, and then eventually we moved to the Donna Ana POW camp, which was a simulated FOB environment, forward operating base environment, which I believe at the time, I can't remember offhand, but I believe it took, for any type of mission whatsoever, even there was no such thing as an admin move back to Fort Bliss to get supplies or whatever it might be. It required a trip ticket, a patrol roster, and I think we could still travel with 1 vehicle at the time, but everything outside of that perimeter was contested, just like in the FOB environments that we saw in Iraq. Fort Bliss, El Paso, Texas, an arid desert environment, much like the Iraq environment as well. And we had very minimal creature comforts while we were there at Donna Ana. It was, we obviously had running water and toilet facilities. We had a DFAC on site, very small shop bed. It was more like a trailer, similar to what you'd see on a FOB as well. So for the first 4 months, the last 4 months of our train-up, we definitely felt the obscure environment that we were going to be in Iraq. For many of us, that was an eye-opener, especially for a young second lieutenant like myself. In January, we did do a JRTC rotation. We did a platoon live fire exercise, which was at that point just most of the soldiers had never done anything like that before. It was maneuvering on foot with mounted vehicles providing support by fire. We had multiple different weapon systems all live, AT-4, hand grenades, of course machine guns. We conducted full spectrum operations, everything from urban operations to some wide area security, local security of some critical sites that they deemed critical, and we also integrated with some local host nation role players while we were down there. We integrated because we were, kind of this separate unit. We integrated with each of the maneuver units while we were there, so we spent a couple of days attached to this infantry battalion, and we attached to the FA battalion that was doing some type of a non-traditional mission as well. Then the battery actually went through some unique circumstances about midway through our train up at Fort Bliss. We received notification that we were going to have to support a mission of sending 60 soldiers to guard a contractor compound in Saudi Arabia. There were some distinct requirements of our soldiers there. They had to have a passport. They could not be Jewish, they could not be female, because of the rules there in the host nation, Saudi Arabia. So we had to identify, what 60 soldiers were going to go do this mission, and we had to identify it in late October, I believe. It was several months beforehand. And the reason for that was we had the time that it was going to take to get passports for all these soldiers and have them vetted was quite lengthy at that time. As you can imagine, this was a leadership challenge on many levels. It affected the morale of the unit quite immensely. We had to first identify which soldiers were eligible to get a passport, which ones could actually go to Saudi Arabia. Then what was left over were the ones that we knew that were actually going to be going into Iraq or Kuwait, into that theater. And it seems kind of crude, but at the time we actually, I remember very distinctly, I remember all the leadership getting together, each of the platoon leaders, platoon sergeants with the commander, XO, and first sergeant, and we went into our command post, and it was very similar to a fantasy football draft at the time, where each of the platoons kind of looked down the roster and said, well, I definitely want that guy to come with us. And obviously as well, the commander had made some tough decisions about which leadership was going to go to be to lead the Saudi Arabian mission. So it played a definite, it was definitely a factor of morale and just overall our unit cohesion. Because at that point, all the soldiers were notified that they were going to either go to Iraq or they were going to go to Saudi Arabia. Some were happy about it. We had some soldiers that were delighted that they were going to Iraq. We had some soldiers that were absolutely, astounded by the fact they were going to go to Saudi Arabia and that, they were going to have to go to this volatile place in Iraq. But we had some that wanted to go to Iraq and vice versa, that, they just couldn't work it out. In Kuwait, it took us, so the additional 2 months after this happened, the individuals, the 60-some soldiers that were then going to go to Iraq, the other half of the unit, we didn't know what our mission was. Through JRTC, we didn't know what we were going to be doing. In Kuwait, we still didn't know what we were going to be doing. It wasn't until about 3 or 4 days before we actually, took off and went up into Baghdad that we learned that we'd be assigned to one of the 184 Infantry Battalion, which is a California National Guard unit. When we arrived in Baghdad, that's when we found out that the 184th was going to be attached to 4th Brigade, 3rd ID. So we deployed to Falcon in Baghdad. And you can see in the picture on the screen right here, this was in Kuwait. The last time we were all together, we got this nice unit picture here. So Baghdad, just for everybody's situational awareness, it's kind of hard to see on here, but Fob Falcon is down here. You have the Camelot Peninsula, which is right here, kind of the distinguishing feature of Baghdad itself. The green zone, and you had Baghdad International Airport over here. We were, I'll talk about this here in a little bit, but right underneath the Camelot Peninsula, there's an oil refinery, and we had played a big role in the protection and security of the oil refinery. The area, next slide here. This depicts it a little bit better. So the area right underneath the Camelot Peninsula is known as Dora, Dora. And Dora is significant because on 19 March 2003, the day before the Iraq War commenced, there was the Dora Farms bombing. And I did a little extra research on that because at first it wasn't significant to me when I arrived there. I don't think any of us really realized what what the Dora Farms attack was. And it wasn't until we were out doing some ground combat presence patrols that we saw these massive craters and just houses that were obviously very large along the river that were just nothing. They were just gone. And started looking into it a little bit more. And so the way I understand is that the U.S. had planned decapitation strikes, about 55 different ones that were going to happen right that evening, right before the war started, and to take out top Iraqi officials that they had good intelligence of where this person was and worked or stayed or lived. And that night before they abandoned those for thinking they'd have one strike to end the whole war right then. They could take out Saddam. They got some intelligence that he was at a farm in Dora, and so they launched 4 2,000-pound bombs and then 40 Tomahawks in just that area of Dora. But the intel is not correct, and in fact, we found out later that Saddam had not been there since 1995. So, 8 years he had been there. Other things about Dora, it was a primarily Sunni population. The area in red kind of denotes the different ethnicities or the racial, or not racial, the different religious factions. The blue is a Christian. So this was I think this picture's from 2004. By 2005 it may have changed slightly, but we did know that in the western part of our AO, we had a large Christian population that was generally friendly to U.S. forces there. But right next door, we had a strong Sunni population that did not like us very much. And obviously you can imagine the amount of fighting there was around there. Some of the yellow areas are Shia. So a large Shia population in the south as well. The threat that we saw in Dora was, we could definitely tell that the insurgency was escalating. IEDs and VB, vehicle-borne IEDs, were the largest threat in 2005 when we got there, in early 2005. Over the course of 2005, we saw and definitely heard and saw less of the VB IEDs, and that's when we started hearing a lot more about these EFPs. And I distinctly remember at the time the word EFP getting thrown out in intel briefs that we were hearing and not really understanding what it was, other than something that would really mess you up, would really hurt you if you got hit by one of those. So we did some training on how to recognize them, but I would not say to the point that it was any different than saying recognizing whether or not that's an EFP or just a conventional IED on the side of the road. We also saw a growing Al-Qaeda in Iraq AQI threat while we were there, which just, again, kind of expounds on that the insurgency was escalating. We saw a lot of kidnappings and assassinations, and also we had frequent, but they were generally inaccurate, mortar and rocket attacks. Our mission, what we ended up doing during the tour, can't be explained in 1 or 2 slides. It changed multiple times while we were there. The one thing we did during the entire time that most of the 12 months that we were there, about 10 and a half months that we were there, we provided local security to the Dora oil refinery. Initially we conducted area security, did combat presence patrols, a show of force in the Dora area, and that was in conjunction with what our battalion was doing. They divided up the AO into different sectors, and we would have a patrol schedule that we'd be doing security missions in there. And then our mission really transitioned and took the top priority of the unit was our military transition teams, the MID teams. We started out with 1 team with the 16th Commandos, and then we had 3 teams, 1 per battalion for the 4th Public Order Brigade that kind of took over in the mid-tour towards the end. So the Dora oil refinery, Camelot Peninsula. You see the star in the center right here. I'm going to talk about that here in just a second. Again, we maintained this mission for most of the tour. We actually moved our unit from FOB Falcon, our headquarters, our battery headquarters, from FOB Falcon out to the oil refinery. and we did a lot of interactions with leadership on the refinery, and we also recorded production flow daily to the State Department while we were there.
Are you doing roving patrols or just static patrols?
We never did any patrols on the refinery itself. I'll go into that here in a second. What we called the location that we were at, we coined it Camelot, which was kind of funny because at first it was just something we called it internally, and then it made itself onto a brigade brief as being called Camelot, and the next thing you know, it was actually labeled on a map for CFLIC as Camelot, to our enjoyment, of course. So you can see here, this picture is the actual building that we stayed in. So while we were there, we provided support for the host nation security that was actually providing security for the oil refinery. We didn't know how much to trust that, obviously, being in the neighborhood that we were in. They actually did a pretty decent job. Only a couple times was the actual main entry control point attacked by insurgents or some other force. And we responded. That was primarily our mission to be there, was to just provide support. It was a show of force as well. I think just knowing that there was some size of U.S. force on the refinery itself prevented a lot of possible enemy contact. It was a great, we realized initially that it was going to be a great spot for retrans, so we had antennas all over the place. As you can actually see on the top of that roof right there. We were a brigade battalion QRF because we could respond to anywhere in the AO, our battalion's AO, within 15 minutes. And it was most time less than that because we were at a red weapon status for individual weapons when we were on here. We kept the ammo on the trucks all the time. We kept the weapons on the truck except for the times that we need to pull them off and clean them. But we cycled that and rotated that as well. We had a roof guard with machine gun nests up on top of the building. And there was pestle barriers that kind of go all the way around the perimeter of the outside, which were the stand concertina wire on top of that. Plus, we had the first ring of the host nation security. Surprisingly, during that entire time, we never had any direct coordinated enemy attacks on our location, other than the ECP of the enemy, or the ECP of the oil refinery. Never had anything actually happen. We had the potential for there to be. We had, if you are looking out the back windows of this building, you can actually see the two-story bridge that goes from southern Baghdad into the Camelot Peninsula, and that's only about 350 meters, so it was very easy for somebody to just drive by, stick a weapon out the window and shoot in our direction. The antennas on top of the building were kind of a giveaway as to where we were, but nothing ever came from it. Usually we'd hear some pinging off the sides of the wall, and then the sound of gunfire later would take cover. But we sandbagged everything on that side as much as we could. So, in the facility here, if you could call it that, we actually did have showers and laundry facilities here, which was great. They had a water treatment plant on the refinery itself. They had a whole community of people that just lived on the refinery. They were the workers that were on the refinery. And so we didn't drink the water from there, but we showered in it, and we did do our laundry on there. So we didn't have to rely on going back and forth to any bases for that. Initially, we had to log pack every day from Falcon to just at least have one hot meal. Otherwise, it was one hot meal, and the rest of the time it was MREs, or we did have some like the Jimmy Dean kind of pre-wrap meals. It was great, or pogie bait. Later on, though, we did receive cooks from our battalion, and also were able to coordinate getting a reefer truck and some grills and just some basic utensils, so we could actually get some food from the DFAC and cook it out there. But it was a process to get that. We had porta-johns, so that building we were in actually did have the Eastern style latrines, which most U.S. soldiers did not know how to properly use. So after some issues with that, we ended up just getting some porta-johns out there. But you can imagine 60 individuals and about 4 porta-johns in scorching heat, how long that took to get pretty right. So we contracted with some local Iraqis that were more than willing to come in and clean them out. And so they came every day and they cleaned them out. And we, what always surprised me was the efficiency that they did it with their 5-gallon ice cream pails and scooping it out. Pretty disturbing, but we had clean latrines. Each room in the building did actually have air conditioning units, so we did have some comfort there. We had interpreters. We had 4 interpreters that lived with us on site here, and which was great because we got to know them really well and became we had them teach us about the culture much more so than our counterparts with the rest of the battalion. We kind of had this pool to use as far as interpreters. So, in fact, I know there's at least one interpreter that is now here in the States. We helped him get back, and he is, I believe, an interpreter now for some special forces group. We got a lot of visitors up here. I think it was kind of a patrol rest stop, more or less. Rather than actually going back through the ECP of the main base, they would stop in here, use our latrines, grab some water, and head back out again, which was totally fine. But after a while, you're like, oh hey, it's another unit coming through. Then eventually, or occasionally, you'd have the brigade commander or some higher level individual come through and make sure everybody's got their uniform on properly. So the other mission that we had decided, so that was the local security mission. The area security mission that we had, initially when we were there was a lot to explore. There was a lot of things to look at. The challenge came just after, probably being there a month or two, was the complacency that set in. Now you've gone down this road how many times and you're looking at the same stuff. So that was definitely a leadership challenge to make sure that soldiers were staying alert. We did a lot of knock-and searches. We received a lot of targets of opportunity from higher. And we were the unit that was out on the patrol at the time in the sector, and we got some intel that, hey, there's a guy here that's on the list. We would go and snatch him up or kick him down the doors. We did a lot of snap traffic control points as well. Never really yielded anything, but it was a good way to just kind of mix things up a little bit. We tried to coordinate our log packs with our patrols as well. If we did have a log pack that we needed to pick up sometime in the evening hours, we tried to coordinate the whole patrol to go and do that. It was difficult at times because we don't set in patterns to get people killed. So just some more pictures of the environment that we were in doing the area security. One thing to note was that our sister unit was in Baghdad right before us. We actually did a logistical rip with them. We got a lot of their weapon systems, we got a lot of their vehicles, we got the 113s that they took over from Minnesota. We thought it was great, get these 113s, because at the time we had level 2 up armor 1025s, which really didn't provide a whole lot of armor. They have 113s, so they didn't have any armor either, but it looked cool. Until it started getting hotter, we realized that every time we did a pivot steer, we destroyed their streets. So we parked them eventually, and at the same time we were getting more 1114s and up armor Humvees. The terrain was everything from palm groves to mud huts to the urban environment where it was very busy. And then our third mission. So mid-tour, we had this mission change, and it started with one team that actually our XO at the time, Captain Rogers, who ended up leading. And each of these teams were about 3 to 5 vehicles, so 13 to 15 soldiers, whatever we could fill it up. We didn't have a whole lot of dismounts come with us. The guy in the back, we didn't have him. It was basically gunner, driver, and the truck commander, and usually a medic. But so you have your 3 truck commanders if you got a three vehicle team, and you had a medic, so 4 people on the ground if you ever had a dismount. It wasn't overly effective, so we had to come up with other ways to be effective in that manner. Our purpose with them was to advise and assist the Iraqi Commando Battalion and the Special Police Brigade that had moved into Baghdad about mid-tour in the summer of 2005. And we started with this here, we started moving pretty much everywhere. wherever the missions that would come down from the Ministry of the Interior or the Ministry of Defense for the commandos, if it meant that they had to go to Sadr City, then we went out to Sadr City with them. So we were no longer confined to the area of Dora in southern Baghdad. We started out with doing a lot of training, especially with the special police. The commandos were pretty well trained. You could tell that they were former Army, and some of them were quite experienced. The special police, on the other hand, were just people off the streets that signed up and said, hey, I want to serve. So we had a tough time with them initially. And they came and they went through some type of basic training that was being put on elsewhere before they came to these battalions. But even from then, you'd expect basically a basic training soldier coming in. So you can see kind of how this was their perimeter that the 1st Battalion had right here. They would all climb into the back of their pickup truck and they'd go out, 5 guys in the back, 4 in the cab, some guy with a machine gun on top. But it worked. It just wasn't very good against IEDs or any small arms fire for that matter. They did do a lot of good training. As you can see, just good order and discipline, and a lot of weapons focused training, because by and large, when we went out with these guys, if you heard 3 rounds, that was probably an accidental or negligent discharge. If you heard more than 3 rounds, then they actually got something going on. Yeah, more pictures of our training that we conducted with them. We spent a lot of time, like I said, with that. You notice this, we did a lot of training on entering and clearing a room, and they would go out with such large amount of forces that, we might be used to a 4-man stack, they had a 12. Effective. And so that was the training. The other part is, of course, the operations. So the Iraqi missions came down every couple of days. It was a high op tempo. When they weren't planning a mission, getting ready for one, they were training. And we were there with them all the time, other than to go back and get some shower, get some rest. There was really no downtime. The mission required that. The transition teams assisted with planning and rehearsals, so the soldiers might be out, my soldiers were out, training on weapons or, maybe operations under terrain, movement techniques, those type of things. When myself and platoon sergeant that was with me, or maybe a couple of the section sergeants were with me, and we might be planning out the next mission, going through rehearsals with them. That was quite challenging, even with the former Iraqi battalion commanders that were in charge. Their idea of troop leading procedures or the military decision-making process isn't exactly what we see it as being. So plans usually amounted to being quite audacious, but they boldly executed. Usually the missions consisted of multiple targets, and multiple could be anywhere from, they're going to try to scoop up 3 guys on the list, or maybe they had a list of 30, and it was go all night long and see how many you can get. The operations typically did involve the entire battalion, so if they had 30 trucks, they were taking 30 trucks out, and it was ducks in a row going through these neighborhoods. In fact, many times that lead truck would do a snake and run into the back end of the convoy. We integrated ourselves to kind of spread out in between. Communications was difficult internally because oftentimes we were spread out, but also with the Iraqis. We carried the same radio that they had. The interpreter sat with me, but that communication over those radios was oftentimes very difficult, so we relied upon, it was mass chaos at times. They would stop, we wouldn't really know what's going on. Dismount from the truck, go up to where action was going on, and get on the ground right with the battalion commander, because the battalion's commander is standing right there, got a pistol in his hand and a radio in the other hand, and he's telling individual soldiers to go here, go here, and go here. The one thing that the 16th, the MIT that was supporting the 16th Commandos was really good at, that they integrated with them on, was they would use the Humvees to breach perimeters. So a typical Iraqi house has that fence wall around it and a metal gate, and they had this all rigged up where that lead vehicle on a house, they'd mark it somehow. Humvee would go by, and they'd have basically like a grappling hook that they would throw around that thing and just rip it right off, and the guys would run in. That was the difference between the Iraqi commandos and the Iraqi special police. So it was a little bit more crisp. At times, we did have to interfere with Iraqi forces in the treatment of prisoners. They would roll up a large number of individuals in these longer duration missions where they had a lot of targets. They didn't really ask a lot of questions. They prefer to ask questions later. It was basically, if you were in this house and you were a male, you're coming with. Whether you had nothing to do with what was going on at all, you were going with. So, and what we realized, was that a lot of times, they would get the back end of a rifle to their head or kicked in the groin, or those type of things. They would throw them right in the back of the trucks and just were treated pretty poorly. So we had to, that was an additional thing that we had to add to the training. So our results, speaking specifically to the mid teams, I mean, when I think back to it, at first I remember specifically being told, hey, you're going to take up this mid team, and here's what we want you to do. I didn't really know what to expect, but thinking back on it, after it was all done, I was so glad that I had that opportunity, because we were so immersed in the culture with the Iraqis at the time. And I believe that more so than what we were doing for area security and doing combat patrols and that working with the Iraqis and trying to improve their ability to secure themselves, that we were firsthand helping and affecting that. So it was much more rewarding to everyone. You'll notice some stats here, and of course, the 636 detainees that we rolled up are definitely attributed to us having the mid team. But that was 636 detainees that we ended up processing the whole 9 yards of taking the pictures with all the information about them, running them through with evidence, and profiling all that information, getting back up through the intel channels, fed up through our battalion, and so on. And we also, I don't remember at the time, I think they were like the X-spray kits, where you would actually spray their hands and their clothing and try to identify if they had explosive residue on them. We went through cases of that stuff. And actually, surprisingly, a lot of the detainees that we did end up collecting on these missions were exposed to some type of explosive residue. Now, I know you get false positives on fertilizer and those type of things as well. So a lot of that had to be sorted out through the relatively the judicial system that Iraq had at the time, which probably wasn't that great. Other results, just all of our missions in general. 3rd ID had a Play of the Day award that I think they would do during their bug or their brief. And so we as a unit got 3 Play of the Day awards. And of course, it's a good morale boost when you hear about that come down the line. One of them was for a weapons cache that we got, and then the other 2 were for support for the large Constitution referendum and the legislative election that happened in December. The October Constitution referendum was huge in terms of our mission to support the special police and commandos. They provided security for the polling sites, and it was their job at the end of that night to securely get all of those ballots back to I don't remember where they all had to go, the central balloting polling site. And of course, it was a high profile type of thing, especially at the end of it when now, okay, we got to securely get, and there was so much intel and reports that, hey, there's going to be attacks on these polling sites all day long, suicide bombers, BBIEDs, you can expect there to be some messing with the polling, just the sanctity of the actual election itself. So we played a big role in that, and it was a very long day. The time from start to finish was like 36 hours that we were rolling with these guys, but it went down well, and across the board it was a huge success. Overall, all said and done, we conducted 1,400 missions, so it was 1,400 trip tickets that we filed when we were going to go out with battle roster numbers and the type of vehicles that we were going with. Seems like a lot, and you start adding it up, okay, it amounted to about 1 per day, sometimes 2 per day, per each of the sections or the mid-teams or the platoons that were going out. our unit did have 14 IEDs that we had made contact with. I still don't know how, considering that our battalion took 17 KIA, and I think the number at one point was 85 Purple Hearts were given out across the battalion. Yet our unit had no Purple Hearts at all. So a lot of luck, and I'm going to just attribute it to also good leadership, keeping soldiers from getting complacent and doing the right thing. Definitely helped with that. We did have, you can see Staff Sergeant Meyer down at the bottom there. He was lucky. That window on that Humvee was pretty shattered. And I don't know if this was Major Rogers' blast right here, but he took, I know there was one that went off that was huge, and they ended up going into the crater and had to get pulled back out there. That could be his right there. Huge. So we had a lot of challenges. We had the long train up. We, of course, how I talked about the unit split and how that affected our morale. Procurement of equipment was difficult as well. I think at times our soldiers saw that maybe the Alpha Company unit that was our sister unit over there had more 1114s than we did, and we're running around in the 1025s with the bubble glass on the door and sandbags down by our feet. It was a concern, but it was another thing that we worked through and we made it happen. Of course, heat and dust got on everything. That's not nighttime, that was during the middle of the day, just a nice sandstorm that came through. Just gross. It also snowed when we were there once, and our interpreter said it was the first time that he's seen snow in Baghdad in 30 years. So you get the heat, you get the snow. Very complex terrain. We had a very diverse and culture around us. We had densely, sparsely populated areas in our AO. We had urban and rural terrain that we were on. We had dirt roads with that were just wide enough that a Humvee could get down, and then we had 3-lane, 6-lane highways in our AO as well. We had a very religiously diverse population. It was just a political mess at that time in 2005 with a lot of assassinations, kidnappings going on. It was a SWEAT MS, good military jargon acronym right there. It was a nightmare as far as that. Electrical, sewage everywhere. I don't think it really ever got any better. Obviously, I've been there the last couple of years, so maybe it's doing fine now, but at that time it was a nightmare. What all that stuff amounted to was just ripe for an insurgency. And while we were there, we saw Al-Qaeda in Iraq's presence growing. Saw spray painted graffiti with something about Al-Qaeda in Iraq being here. The weapons cache that we found, there was a banner that said something about Al-Qaeda in Iraq is coming. So it was very challenging, complex terrain that we were dealing with. We also had, being at this Cop Camelot, we had some challenges there. So it was either feast or famine. It was, the one somewhat warm, stale log pack meal that we got, and then a couple MREs, and then when we got it figured out, then it was like we had so much stuff we didn't know where to put it. So, working through that as well was a process. Our XO was always busy. Some of the most significant challenges that we had was we went through a lot of leadership changes. At the battery level, Major Hervis was reassigned in August of 2005, midway through our tour. Captain Rogers assumed command at that time. He was our XO, then Lieutenant Madrinich, who was the platoon leader, stood up and was the XO. When we took on the MIT missions, we received some soldiers from the battalion to include some officers. I want to be politically correct. Units typically don't give up their best officers for these type of slice missions, so we had some troublemakers that were with us as well. They'll probably eventually see this video someday. I wonder if you're referring to who. But I will say though that some of the soldiers that we get, almost all of them, were just fantastic. Jumped right into it. They immersed into the Minnesota culture that we brought to Baghdad, and really became a cohesive unit. First Sergeant Steele, he was, like I mentioned earlier, he was a medical refrad about mid-tour. I think it was probably a month and a half after Major Hervis had been reassigned, and Sergeant Brecky came in and took over. We were we had some issues with some discipline going on during those summer months. I think a part of it was just we were so piecemeal with the different transition teams kind of doing whatever they were doing, that wasn't a lot of centralized leadership coming from the first sergeant to really roll up things like uniform and just hygiene standards and those type of things, and that was needed. So Sergeant Brecky came in, breathing fire, and he fixed that. At the battalion level, we had an interesting situation, it really was, and we didn't do a whole lot with the 184th during the train up at Fort Bliss. We knew them guys as kind of, they were the wild bunch. They were crazy. We remember their battalion commander very well, Colonel Fry, carried around a hatchet everywhere he went. The soldiers called him Hatchet Man, and he trained his guys as though they were frontline and going into a war. Not so much of the win the hearts and minds of the Iraqis. We're fighting a counterinsurgency here. It was much more of, hey, we're going to come in here, we're going to kick some butt. So when we got assigned to them in Iraq, we had to kind of deal with that a little bit as well. And all in all, it wasn't a bad thing. The soldiers needed to see that. And a lot of the soldiers were diehard followers of Colonel Fry. There's CGSOC did a case study on the command climate and leadership in the battalion, and I actually gave copies to you guys of that article. Colonel Fry was relieved in August of 2005, and at that time there were a number of different things that had happened in the battalion that were just not in his favor. There were some soldiers that were that abused prisoners. He got caught for that. There was some soldiers that had some contraband and drugs in the barracks. So it was kind of seen, and then I don't know if he had the best reputation with his commander and his raider, senior raider over there. So it all amounted, came down at one time, and he probably was in some ways a scapegoat for a lot of those issues that were happening. But a change was needed, and so they brought in Lieutenant Colonel William Bill Wood, who was, I believe at the time, Brigade S3 for 3rd Brigade, so sister brigade to our brigade. And Colonel Wood came in, and he was quite the opposite of Colonel Fry. He was hard, disciplined. He came in and he really changed some stuff around. And I think, at least from a leadership standpoint, we really latched on to him because he led very effectively. He said a lot of things that made sense to us, and he spelled out things like counterinsurgency, which many of us, myself included at the time, didn't realize there was a manual on counterinsurgency. So he was a breath of fresh air, I think, for the battalion. Unfortunately, the night before we were going to kick off a very, very large scale mission, he was responding to I believe it was an IED that actually killed the Alpha Company commander. And so he was responding to that because his PSD was out. I don't know where they were at the time, but they were the closest by, so they responded. He got out of the vehicle and a secondary IED went off and killed him as well. So, we were all standing in the rehearsal room because we were going to do a large terrain model rehearsal, and we were just waiting for him to come in. And I remember the Brigade XO coming in, and just the look on his face was just ghostly white, saying that the colonel had been killed. And so everybody kind of took that news, and the mission went on. We had to continue mission. The battalion XO stood in and made it happen. So then they brought down another battalion commander from 3rd ID, and that was our last battalion commander. So we had a lot of challenges when it came to leadership, and it was from across the board, from the lowest soldier all the way on up. I think you realize when your battalion commander gets killed, it can happen to anybody. So it was definitely eye-opening. We redeployed from Iraq. Everybody was whole. We had a couple individuals that got refed at home due to medical reasons. We had one soldier that checked the fuel tank for a generator at night. He couldn't see, so he just opened it up, been blasting with heat all day, right? Opened it up, took his lighter. So he got burned pretty bad. We had to evac him out of there. But that was really the most serious situation that we ran into, was that, and I feel very fortunate about that. I think all of us do. And then we finally got back together with the whole unit, back at the Cloquet Armory in March of 2006, and got a picture again in the cold of Cloquet. With that, that is my brief on our deployment in 2004.
So the soldier that was injured, did he recuperate? Did he okay?
Yes, yep, when we got back home, he was good. He had some skin grafting done, I think, on his hands, for the most part. And he always had a really bushy mustache. He was kind of known for that. And I remember seeing him, because I was sleeping at the time. It happened in the middle of the night, and they came and got me and bring him up to, we weren't that far away from the medical facility, the level 1 medical facility that was in the green zone. So we just brownie backed him out of there real fast. But I remember seeing him, and he had no mustache, so I didn't even recognize him at first. He was wearing also one of those Under Armour tight shirts at the time, you know what I'm talking about? Melted, just melted. So shortly after that, nobody was wearing those shirts anymore either. Good to see that first. But yeah, he's retired now. But any other questions?
John, nice presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
Really nice, thank you.
I also gave you guys an article that was written by the LA Times.
Yeah, I got the article before.